Hey everyone, welcome to Midnight Whisperer, a place where real stories from Reddit's darkest threads come to life. If you crave mystery, fear, and the thrill of the unknown, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Now, let's step together into the shadows of today's story. Thank you all for your comments and messages, making sure I'm staying safe, offering suggestions, highlighting potential clues, and bringing possible warning signs to my attention. You've been instrumental in my journey, not only to exist past 27, but to understand where I've come from, where I'm going, and how to make this all right. For me, that started with making sure my son was safe. After my now late father revealed a cult was breeding the women of my bloodline for sons, I was terrified for my own child. As I made the long drive back home, speeding far over the limit yet somehow not quickly enough, questions plagued my mind. What could they possibly want with him? Had they already found him? What would they do to him? Or what had they already done? They had already orchestrated the murder of my sisters, my mother. I wouldn't put it past them to harm him, or me, now that they'd surely found the mangled body I'd left behind. Now, I didn't mention my son straight away, because I don't think I have the right to call myself his mother. I gave birth to him almost 4 years ago, but I certainly had no part in raising him. I never expected to get pregnant in my life, and I certainly never expected to keep a pregnancy that was conceived through an assault. But part of me wanted to prove I could be a better parent than my father was. In the months leading up to his birth, though, I knew I couldn't be that for him. I was terrified I would end up like my father, and it felt selfish to put my child through the same grief of losing a mother so young. Back then, I thought I still had an expiration date. I gave him up to a couple who couldn't conceive on their own. They were overjoyed to take him. I didn't want to hang around and confuse him, but his new parents agreed to maintain contact in case of medical emergency. I clung to this glimmer of hope on the trip home, knowing that as soon as I got back, all I needed to do was find their contact information. It didn't take long minutes after pulling into my garage. I was already dialing their number. I whispered soft pleas into the receiver as I waited for their answer. It was late by then, but this could not wait until morning. The line had almost rung through to voicemail when a confused woman answered with a groggy greeting. Immediately, words spilled from my mouth like vomit, jumbled and rushed. I wasn't about to tell her what had happened that day, so I just told her I'd had a bad feeling about her son, that I needed to know he was okay. Her long, exhausted sigh and hesitance to answer sent my heart racing. When she finally spoke, my blood ran cold. She offered an apology, saying that he'd been placed with another family a year prior due to unexpected behavioral issues mainly. He had a knack for breaking things, no matter how closely they owe. Watched him. She attempted to reassure me by insisting she'd gone through an agency that actively sought out problem children, that he'd been placed with a family more up to the challenge. She couldn't provide much information on his new family, but she knew that he was still in state. Her answers were infuriatingly vague and non-committal. I knew I wouldn't get much more from her, so I hung up the phone after she agreed to forward me whatever information she had on the adoption and the name of the agency. A simple Google search made it clear that it wasn't even a real organization. In the first place, I spent the next few hours agonizing over the whereabouts of my son, leaving frantic messages at any agency I could find, though I knew they wouldn't hear them until morning. I tried to tell myself that perhaps the agency had just been renamed, but it seemed unlikely. I was left distraught and terrified for my child. Part of me just knew that the cult already had him. It took over a week of sleuthing, but I'm ecstatic to say that I did indeed find the location of my son with the meager information provided. He was still in state, but I live in a pretty large state, so another long journey. I made contact with his new mother, who agreed to a visit just so I could check up on him. I thought maybe she understood the whole mother's intuition thing. I packed my things and piled into my car, setting off immediately. Only about 20 minutes in did I start to entertain the idea that this was most certainly a trap. I'd had a bad feeling about going to my dad's, but I had the element of surprise on my side then, and that was certainly gone now. Pure terror circulated through my system that whole drive, my hands jittering and barely able to grip the wheel in the late afternoon. I arrived at a beautiful house, one of those houses that seems too good to be true, one of those houses that you know is just a facade for familial dysfunction. I know because I used to live in one of those. As I pulled up, I took a moment to ready myself in the car, as if I was waiting in the wings, rehearsing my lines one more time before going on stage. As I looked out, I swear for a moment I could see a figure in the window, something pale, watching. My blood ran cold. It didn't seem to move when I saw it. Instead, cocked its head, slightly curious. Nervously, I exited the car and knocked on the door. A gaunt young woman in a white summer dress cracked it open. "Oh, hi, Laura," she squeaked, visibly flustered. She raked a hand of bony fingers through her stringy brown hair as she pulled the door wide open. "I'm Catherine. Come on in." Tentatively, I trudged into the mansion on the thick soles of my combat boots, suddenly aware of how clunky I appeared in comparison to her. Light on her bare feet, she was as dainty and delicate as a daisy, yet a hollow look in her. I made her seem. Wilted dot, she led me to an immaculate kitchen, offered me a seat. "Sorry to bother you like this," I began awkwardly, clearing my throat. Where is he?" "Oh, he's upstairs," she replied, wandering about the room to fix a couple glasses of water, playing with Lucia, his sister. Cool, I answered, trailing off. Studying her features, I internally remarked at how similar we were in appearance, despite our clear differences in mannerisms. Something seemed so familiar about her when she turned her back to me to open a cupboard. It all became clear. A cluster of freckles on the back of her left shoulder, one that I'd always insisted gleefully looked just like the constellation Virgo. "Katie," I breathed. She turned to face me. A brief moment of clarity flickered behind her sunken eyes, before ultimately vanishing. "Catherine, Katie," I pleaded. "It's me, your cousin, Elle. I know we haven't seen each other since we were little, but if you're trapped, I can help you. Please, come with me." Drawing a sharp breath in, she responded, almost as if rehearsed, recited, as a daughter of the precipice. "It is my destiny, my honor, my place in the order to be sacrificed." Before I had a chance to respond, she was already screeching at the top of her lungs. "Help! Craig!" Focusing on her body, I pushed her into the wall to hold her still. But the damage had already been done. I could hear hurried footsteps plodding down the stairs. An elderly man suddenly emerged in the doorway, despite the unhinged expression across his face. I immediately recognized him from the old family photos I pored over in my youth, trying to get to know my mother, to get closer to her. Sake, I sighed, a hapless attempt to disguise my fear as I recognized him as my grandfather, as my mother's father. I took hold of him immediately, freezing him in place, yet found it difficult to maintain my attention on two living beings with free will at once. My grip wavered between the two until I was able to maintain a consistent, albeit weaker, hold on both of them. But my focus deteriorated entirely when a young boy crept out from behind my grandfather's frame. A pale young boy with chestnut hair and bright hazel eyes full of curiosity. A young boy who appeared nearly identical to my own self at his age, because he was mine. Do it now, my grandfather demanded, gesturing wildly in my direction. The child hesitated a moment before nodding mutely. He gave me a firm look that I immediately recognized, the one I'd used frequently since acquiring my powers. I braced myself for the impact, but nothing more than a slight vibration overcame me. A weakened version of my own abilities, I assumed. Taking care to avoid the young boy, I returned my stare to my grandfather's body to gather him up in my hold once more. My heart almost stopped as I struggled to make contact with his form, as I realized I didn't have any power at all. I just looked like some stupid asshole, glaring at an old man, expecting something to happen. His reaction was one of shock, too, but with an undertone of awe. I knew it, he stammered, gazing at my sudden paralysis of power, his initial joy escalating into uproarious laughter. It's been you all along. The prophecy, Catherine mused, pacing across the kitchen to get a closer look. The one who will put an end to the daughters. She called out to Lucia before kneeling on the tile floor before the boy, laying her forehead on the cool surface. A young girl, perhaps a year older than my son, with near white blonde hair, popped in and followed suit. The whole charade made me sick. You mean to wipe us all out? I sneered, using anger as a front for my clear powerlessness. Your own family? He nodded his head contentedly in return. As it has been foretold, the daughters of the precipice are a danger to this world, too unruly, too unyielding, too powerful. Generations have passed down the promise that one day, one glorious day, a son will be born with the ability to rob the daughters of their abilities, to weaken them so they may be slain. A wicked grin twisted his features as he ruffled the top of my son's hair. And it was you who delivered him to us. And then, what? You'll just keep killing any girls born in the future? Any girls alive now? I stammered, looking forlornly, fearfully, at Lucia. You're telling me you're going to kill that little girl right there, right now? The older man simply raised his eyebrows as if to communicate that he had no qualms in doing so, as it has been foretold. His complete detachment from humanity, from reality, left me trembling. I knew it'd all be over if I didn't act quickly. I gazed softly at the young boy. Hey, what's your name, kid? Kid, that's what I've always called him in my mind, just Kid. He'd often pop into my mind during the most mundane tasks, and I had no name to call him. I'd think, I wonder what Kid is doing. I wonder if Kid is okay. I wonder if Kid is happy. I wonder if Kid's family loves him. Blinking in confusion, he stuttered Eli. Eli? Eli? Okay? I breathed, holding my lips tight together to fight off tears. I didn't want to tell you this way, Eli, but these people do not love you. They are using you to hurt innocent people like me, like Catherine, like Lucia. They killed my mum, my sisters. Please, please, let me go, so I can take you somewhere safe." "She's a liar, Eli," the elderly man snapped, raving like an absolute lunatic. He drew an ornate blade from his waistband. "We need to put her down, put them all down, like the vermin they are." His eyes welled over, and I could almost sense the internal battle raging within. Tears finally started to streak his face as the tingling sensation began to ebb. N-no, ... I like my sister. Eli's hold finally broke as he grabbed Lucia by her elbow to flee from the room. I filled the old man with my energy until he was unable to move, as still as a statue. Driving my focus into the knife, I snatched it from him to suspend it in midair. I took a deep, calming breath before catapulting it in his direction. The blade was already out of my mental grasp by the time I realized Catherine had launched. Off of the floor to lunge in front of the man, the weapon buried deep into her neck, taking her to the ground instantly. I scrambled to help her, only to realize I'd never healed before, and I certainly did not know how. She swatted my vague attempts away as she pulled the dagger out. I watched in horror as she plunged the blade back into her chest, gasping. A delighted grin spread across her face in her last moments. An overwhelming surge of anger flared within me, both at my grandfather and at myself for Catherine's demise. I closed my eyes to steady my emotions, but found myself back on that cliff as soon as I opened them, kneeling at its very edge, whipping. Wind chapped my face as I gazed at the churning black rapids below. Just beneath the surface, I could get a clearer view of the shadowy mass below, dynamic in its shape, seeming to stretch and move in every direction, shifting constantly, amorphous and vague, yet clearly belonging to one collective intelligence. Chittering whispers arose from below, the individual words indiscernible, yet the message entirely clear. Jump. I furiously shook my head in response to the command, to rid myself of its enticing pull. Reality materialized back around me. A pool of blood had spread beneath me, soaking through the knees of my jeans. With the crash of the waves subsiding, I could hear a low, guttural moan behind me. I turned to find my grandfather in pieces on the floor, still alive yet clearly in agony. His top half was torn from his legs, which lay motionless across the room. Slick, visceral gore trailed from where he'd been severed, ragged and uneven. I rose to my feet to finish him off, though I'm afraid to admit I wasn't aware I'd even started in the first place. He whimpered as I followed the trail of blood towards him, but traded cowardice for fury once I crouched beside him. They'll find you, he strained through gritted teeth. His face was pale and covered in sweat. As it has been foretold. Let them, I seethed before sending all of my energy into his neck, snapping it with such force that his head nearly spun. As it has been foretold, my ass. Listen. I hope you all will understand why I've been absent for so long after reading this. I'm now caring for not only my son, but for Lucia as well. I was surprised by their willingness to come with me after I'd slaughtered their previous guardians, but the children had sadly suffered abuse at their hands. It's been an adjustment for sure, but I'm committed to keeping them safe. I resolved to protect them as I drove them to their new home, as I knew we'd all be in danger of being found. I just didn't expect it to happen so quickly. As I pulled up to my place, I knew we'd already been found. I knew because a strange man was there, banging on the door. It's been one hell of a week, friends, and I've got a lot to update you all on. I hope you'll forgive me if I rush. Through a lot, like I said, there's a lot I have to say, and I have a job to get back to. Anyway, I believe last time I left off on arriving home from my trip to get my son. I ended up finding him with my shit stain of a grandfather, found out my son is some sort of prophecy, and I came home with not only my son, but with Lucia, the little girl he's come to know as his sister as well. Of course, I was happy to be reunited with my child, Eli, but I was terrified now that I knew he was so valuable to the cult behind the death of my mother and sisters. So, I was understandably pretty freaked out to find a strange man knocking on my front door the minute I got home. "Laura, who's that?" Lucia squeaked from the back seat. I hadn't even realized that I'd stopped in the middle of the street. I swallowed my fear, pulled into the driveway, and stepped out of the car. Commanding the kids to stay inside, I locked the doors and approached the stranger. "Excuse me," I barked, attempting to appear confident. I wasn't exactly out of the closet with my powers yet, so I was nervous about what could happen. "Who are you? Why are you here?" The man turned to face me, a grin plastered across his face. "Laura," he replied, almost nostalgically, as if he knew me. I was sure I'd never seen him before, and I think I'd recognize him if I had, considering the raised pink scar across his left cheek. He had the rough, rugged appearance of a man who'd seen too much. "Answer me," I demanded, gaze firmly locked on him. If he made any sudden movements, I had to be ready. He remained where he stood, seemingly attuned to my apprehensions. "It's me, Laura. It's Uncle Joe." I couldn't help but laugh at whatever mind games he was attempting as I hardened my stare, freezing him in place. I hadn't seen my Uncle Job since I was little, but my memory wasn't that poor. He was my mother's twin. He had the same spattering of freckles across his pale face and light brown hair that she had, that I have. With his olive skin and tight salt and pepper crew cut, the man before me looked nothing like Job, nor anyone in my family. "Let's try that again," I breathed, inching closer towards the stranger. "Tell me the truth." I could sense a flicker of fear within him, within me as well. If they'd found me already, I knew I was screwed, but I'd have to deal with that later. The man was silent for a few long moments, and then he began to sing. All the little girls dancing on the cliff tops, all their little bracelets jingling in the breeze. He started, the tune jaunty, strangely familiar. All the little girls, suddenly their dance stops, and all the little girls jumped down into the sea. I finished, eyes welling with tears. An old nursery rhyme I didn't even know I'd retained. One my Uncle Job had taught me while we reenacted the scene with my dolls. I relinquished my hold on him. "Why? Why have you come?" "I'm here to help, Elle. They're after you." "Won't be long until they find what they're looking for," he sighed, nodding his head towards the car, towards Eli. I knew I had to keep my guard up. Couldn't trust anyone in the family anymore, but he was always so kind, so gentle. Nothing like my father. Something in him seemed genuine. I made a split-second decision to hear him out. I ushered the kids out of the car into the house and allowed Job inside. I was terrified I'd made the wrong choice, but figured I'd at least be able to use the full extent of my powers if I needed to behind closed doors. I think Job knew it too. After getting the children settled in my room for a nap, I sat Job down on the couch in the living area. I got him a glass of water, though I never let him out of my direct line of sight. It wasn't just me I had to worry about anymore. "Tell me everything," I rushed, pulling a chair to face him. "No, you have no reason to trust me," he answered, a deep frown on his weathered face. "I wouldn't trust me either, but you have to understand. My father raised me to believe that the women of our family are evil. He raised me to believe in the prophecy inhaling sharply through my teeth." I cut him off. "Yeah, he told me about that. Before I killed him." Job nodded almost enthusiastically, his eyes widening. Good riddance. He wanted me to fulfill the prophecy so badly, but when I didn't grow to display any powers, he appointed me as your mother's monitor. The name itself struck fear into my heart. Who had been monitoring me? As your mother's monitor. I was to take an active role in her life, to keep tabs on her, to make sure she didn't escape before she turned 28. Despite the remorse evident in his tone, both terror and anger surged within me. Who is my monitor?" I asked reluctantly. "Your father. Killed him too," I blurted, if only to settle my own nerves. Job smirked. "I probably would have been your monitor too, but I defected from the cult soon after you girls were born. Your mum was a fighter, so they made sure I kept a close eye on her. Ironically, spending so much time with her forced me to critically examine the ideologies my father had instilled in me until they started to unravel. And when I got to know you, and Joy, and Moira, I finally saw the truth. I couldn't comprehend the possibility of evil within you girls, knew it couldn't be right to snuff out the light you brought to the world. I started digging, found out some hard truths. Turns out I was being monitored too," he stated with a sad laugh, tears pooling in his eyes. "I managed to warn your mother about the cult, the fathers of the precipice, before they removed me, before they killed her." I shook my head vigorously, fearfully reminding myself that this could easily be a setup. Besides, there was still the matter of his appearance to clear up. How can I trust you? You don't even look like yourself. When your mother was murdered, I lost my best friend. I wanted nothing more than to dismantle the fathers, but I knew they were looking for me. I scoured the internet for solutions. After years in hiding, I found just that in a strange boutique, one where you can walk out in an entirely new appearance. He explained, gesturing to the new features he'd been granted. "I don't expect you to trust me, your sisters. Didn't because they didn't recognize me, but I know you are my only chance at ending the father's cycle of killing now, once and for all." Tentatively, I allowed myself to put my trust in him. I elected to keep Ely's powers secret, terrified of what might happen if the man I'd let into our lives turned out to be just as bad as other family members I'd been reunited with recently. I was constantly on edge, felt as if I had to sleep with one eye open again. That kind of paranoia is all too familiar to me, like the curse I'd believed would take me all of my life was renewed. But this time, I knew the danger to my life, to Eli and Lucia's lives, to be real as I got the children accustomed to their new home. Job spent the next weeks attempting to infiltrate the fathers of the precipice, to discern the location of their headquarters. He insisted that many young boys were held captive there, guarded by the fathers. He painted a horrifying picture of the abuse he'd suffered there, the indoctrination forced upon him, between strategizing with Job and playing with the children. I spent long hours training myself and bolstering my discipline. After I'd put the kids to bed one evening, I found myself plagued by guilt, recalling how Catherine had died at my hands, how I couldn't heal her. I chased the memory with 6 shots of vodka and spent the rest of the night, alternating between dragging a razor across my skin and willing the wound shut to put my mind at ease. I must admit that, despite the powers I had at my disposal, I feared. Going up against so many people, hell-bent against my survival. It was hard enough trying to control 2 people last time. I was terrified how I would fare against the dozens of men Joe proximated would be waiting for me. But I knew I had to try, if what he said was indeed true. When Job shot out of his seat last week, I immediately knew that he'd found what he was looking for. He'd been perched on that chair in front of his computer so long that I thought he might have grown attached to it. My uneasiness escalated to new heights as I understood he'd found the place where I'd meet my fate, whether good or bad. He called me over to show me his screen. He'd typed in the address to show an image of my destination. A sprawling green lawn out front, a towering white mansion. It was almost a day's drive away, but it was within reach, and although I was scared out of my mind of what might await me there, I wanted to go. I needed to finish what I'd started. Job and I made arrangements to leave the next morning, though. We argued over how to handle the children. I didn't trust anyone to watch them, yet I refused to take them with me. They wanted Eli more than they wanted me, and I knew they wouldn't hesitate to kill Lucia. It seemed like there was no solution. I insisted on going alone, but Job wouldn't hear it. We agreed to settle it in the morning, so I put the kids to bed while Job lay down to rest on the couch. I slipped out of the house in the middle of the night. It was certainly a risk leaving the children with Job, but I'd come to realize that he was the only person I felt like I could trust. I again feared this was a misstep, but I prayed otherwise. I set a course for the mansion that housed the fathers of the precipice and quietly pulled out of the driveway. I realized that each time I update you all, I mention how terrified I am as I make whatever trip I'm on. This time, though, I felt like I was nearing closer to certain death with each mile covered. I worried constantly about Eli and Lucia. I wanted nothing more than to come home to them, so I resolved to do just that, though it seemed overly optimistic. Naive daughters. I drew closer to my destination. I found myself panicked, jittery. I'd pulled over to nap in my car, but it was a restless sleep. Still, the sooner I was finished with the fathers, the sooner I could return home. I parked about a mile away, opting to walk the remaining distance. The estate was even more lavish in person than the pixels on Job's screen could possibly display. I felt dwarfed by its size and feared it as if it was some massive predator. Its enormous arched door, the mouth I was willingly striding towards. This time, though, I wasn't looking for answers, wouldn't be asking any questions. Job had instructed me where I needed to go to rescue the children. I thrust the door open to find a large entryway, with 2 marble staircases leading up to an overhang on the 2nd level. A man stood, frozen, on one of the steps. I snapped his neck with no hesitation. Within seconds, more men spilled onto the 2nd floor balcony before clambering down the stairs. One drew a gun, pointing it at my chest. I redirected his aim before forcing him to empty the chamber into his mouth. I forced another off the overhang, slamming him face first into the marble flooring, but they kept coming, one after another, closer and closer. I took out a few more by releasing the chandelier from the ceiling to crush them, but as soon as I felt I had the upper hand, more men trickled downstairs. More came at me from the hallways on either side of me, panicked, overwhelmed, and terrified. I felt a pair of arms seize me from behind, saw the herd of men closing in on me, their faces warped with hatred and disgust. I shoved as many of them away as I could, but I was merely buying time, and I was barely doing that, considering how many there were surrounding me, too many to control on my own. Each attempt grew feebler, weaker as I felt myself fatiguing rapidly. I knew it was over then. Yet as I began to accept my fate, I started to hear the faint sounds of waves breaking against tough rock, of wind whistling all around. My surroundings began to fade, giving way to that same old scene that had tormented me since I first received my powers. There was the shelf of rock, the churning black rapids down below, the whipping wind. But there was something else there, this time. Something that chilled me to the bone. There were girls, not just little girls, but teenagers and young women, too. All in flowing white dresses with gleaming silver adorning their wrists. At first sight, it seemed almost as if they were dancing, in constant movement, moving in pairs, switching partners. All the little girls dancing on the cliff tops. The horrified looks on their faces made it clear, though, that this was not a joyous occasion. They were saying goodbye, their gowns thrashed about, in the wind as they whispered softly to one another, tears streaking their faces. In lieu of embracing, they reached out to hold another's hands in theirs tenderly before moving on to the next. This was all they could do. Their wrists were shackled, all the little girls' bracelets jingling in the breeze. A man's bellow pierced through the tragic scene, startling both me and the group gathered on the cliff. Just behind me, a collection of men began to advance upon the women and girls, brandishing knives in their hands. I leapt back at the sight, but they didn't seem to notice me, only seemed to see or care about the women and girls in white. All the little girls, suddenly their dance stops. They continued forward as the first of the girls jumped, relentless in their pursuit until, screaming in horror, they all launched themselves off the precipice, and all the little girls jumped down into the sea. I rushed forward to stare over the edge of the cliff, watching in terror as the girls thrashed wildly in the water, drowning. Their collective fear, despair, anger overwhelmed me, the power of their emotions nearly suffocating. Wailing, I beat one fist into the rough rock beneath me as, one by one, they tired, their bodies ceasing to sink. Deep below, the sea enveloped them until it appeared to me just as it had before, the dark, churning rapids. So fearsome, yet at the same time, so inviting. There was no time for second guessing. I threw my arms above my head and dove off the cliff. I plunged headfirst into the brisk, briny water. As the sea swallowed me whole, I propelled myself deeper, closer to whatever had been coaxing me down all of this time. Forcing my eyes open, I recoiled as I realized I was not alone. The fallen girls and women swam in a torrent around me, their corpses now bloated and discolored, flesh peeling and hanging off bone in several places. The original daughters of the precipice, forced off the cliff before they could age into their powers, urging myself even further into the dark water. I nearly opened my mouth to gasp as I saw Moira and Joy swimming alongside me, their gruesome appearances still jarring. though their presence was oddly comforting. Moira extended a finger to point. I followed the trajectory with stinging eyes. All my apprehensions came to a screeching halt as a figure came into view. It was my mother, beaming. She reached her hand up from the depths. I extended mine in turn, kicking my feet to hasten the connection. As soon as my hand grazed hers, a surge of electric energy raced through me, startling me. She gave me an encouraging nod, and I clasped onto her hand. Holding it tight in my own, I returned to reality at the father's mansion with a splitting screech. The men backed away, hands clapped over their ears. A power unlike any I'd ever known or felt before flowed through me, flowed out of me as I faced each of my attackers with renewed energy. I felt my hand plunge into one man's chest to crush his beating heart still inside him. I felt my energy fill an assailant's brain with so much energy that it overheated to explosion. Blood dribbling from his ears as he crumpled to the ground. I felt myself shred 5, 10, 15 more attackers with less energy than it takes to flick on a light switch. With my attackers taken care of, I took a deep breath in, slowly exhaling the rage and power granted to me by the daughters of the precipice. I needed to be in control when I found the children, though I feared a second wave of fathers, likely, awaited me. As I quietly padded across the room, I noticed one of my assailants still clinging to life, his eyes wide and breaths shallow. Directing my glare at him, I flipped his body over, leaving him face down in a thick pool of his comrade's blood to drown. It seemed fitting, I followed Job's directions down the hallway to a locked door, busting the lock with a pointed stare. I crept down the stairs, the door revealed, anxious for what might await me. What I saw down there, well, it was much worse than I ever anticipated. The room was nearly empty. No children, no people, save for one man sitting, waiting. He just laughed at my shocked expression, my fear for the children. Not what you were expecting. My heart began to race. So, it was a trap. Job lied to me, and I'd left my children. With him, you're just like all the other daughters. You think you're so smart, think you're better than us, he rambled, shaking his head incredulously. We knew you would find us, knew you'd be stupid enough to come here yourself. We've placed all the boys in homes. We couldn't risk you coming here to slaughter them all. The prophecy will be fulfilled, as it has been foretold. It was my turn to laugh, scoffing at his assumption that I'd come to kill innocent children. The prophecy has been fulfilled, all right, I muttered, immobilizing him in my hold. I didn't know what tricks he might have had up his sleeve, so I couldn't be too careful. My son is the prophecy, yet he's stronger, smarter, and more compassionate than any of you. When the moment of truth came, he thought for himself. He let me go. The cycle is over. You're wrong, he spat, glaring. The others are still out there. They will continue to breed and slaughter you like livestock, believing the prophecy remains unfulfilled. They will find you. They will kill you, and they will take your son. I froze in place as I realized. He was right. I thrust his head into the wall behind him before running out of the mansion to get my vehicle. The return trip was no easier than the trip there. I felt as if I had to be on constant surveillance. Worst of all, I had no idea what I was coming home to. The worst case scenario ran through my mind. On repeat, Job had killed Lucha, had taken Eli, had alerted more of the fathers to my location. More likely than not, they would already be there. I was so tired. I didn't have much fight left in me. I should have stopped to sleep, paused to recharge for the attack I knew awaited me, but there was no time to waste if my children were in danger again. The thumping sound coming from my trunk showed me I had even less time than I'd originally hoped. As I finally pulled back into my driveway, the front door swung open. I jumped in my seat, bracing myself for the onslaught I knew I was unprepared for. Instead, Eli ran out, followed by Lucia, then Job. I thrust the door to my car open and stumbled out of the vehicle to meet them, crumbling with exhaustion onto the paved ground. Eli wrapped his arms around me, tears running down his face. "You don't leave again," he cried, weakly. I held him close as I finally allowed myself to process all that had happened in the past month, to finally grieve the losses I'd faced, the years of life I'd lost to a false curse, the lives I'd taken. Heaving sobs racked my body as Lucia joined the embrace. I snaked one arm around her shoulders. Uncle Job kneeled on the ground behind me to rub an open palm over my back, comforting me. A series of loud thumps rocked the back of the parked car, sent me back into panic. I whipped my head around to glance at Job over my shoulder. "We're not safe," I whispered. "Get the kids inside." He did as I asked. Once I was alone again, I opened the garage door to pull my car inside. Popping the trunk open, I stared down at my captive, the man from the basement. He was bound and gagged, struggling furiously against his restraints. I rammed his head against the floor of the trunk until he was out cold again. I'd come back for him later. I needed a hot shower and a warm meal. Needed some time with my family first. Like I said before, he was right. There are still more out there, still more fathers using the daughters as incubators for a prophecy that had already come. A prophecy of hatred and fear that I will end with all of the compassion and love I have for my son, all of the humanity that exists within him that the fathers couldn't steal. There are still more fathers who would come to harm my family, still more innocent children in their clutches. In the days since, I've been using my powers to extract information from my captive, healing him just as he starts to slip away. Job and I have already confirmed 3 homes for me to visit once I've gotten enough rest. I'm exhausted, physically, mentally, emotionally, and I'm tired of using my powers to harm. But I know I can't stop yet. I know there are more out there like me, more innocent women, more innocent children, likely more defectors like Job, too. I can't rest until I find and free them all, until I ensure the safety of my family. And I will make damn sure that every woman and girl in my family, every daughter of the precipice, makes it to age 28.